Historical Museum. We have here the flag, and at the center of the flag, the seal of the city. And they are telling us the earliest history of Detroit. We can see here some figures. They are flowers of lily representing French monarch. They were the first settlers. After the French came the British, symbolized by these three golden lions. And you may already notice that you can see these same three lions on the uniform of England national football team. And after the British, finally came the Americans. 13 red and white stripes and 13 stars, both of them representing first 13 colonies. So, in 1701, a French explorer called Antoine de la Motte du Cadillac founded a fort called the Pontchartrain de Detroit. And from that time on, a French population established on the territory, and it lasted till 1760, when the 70 Years' War ended. In that war, major powers in Europe, France, Great Britain, and other countries like Austria, Spanish Empire, Russia, and so on, fought each other not inside Europe, but other foreign establishments, including North America, where the war front was called the French and Indian War, as well as Central America, West Africa, and other countries such as India, Philippines, and others. So now, British was taking control of the territory, and it ended in 1796. Well, 1796 was after 1776, the American Revolution. What happened? Well, officially, according to the Treaty of Paris, all the territory east of Mississippi River was part of the United States. But not all issues were resolved, and the agreement was possible only after the Jay Treaty was signed in 1796. Now, finally, the United States had complete control over the territory, and the city was ready to thrive. But an unfortunate event, 9 years after, in 1805, the Great Fire. And it is represented in this seal. You can see two muses on the left side. She seems very anguished. She's crying and weeping the most. And on the right side, trying to comforting and encourage to rebuild. So the motto in Latin, Speramus Meliora, we hope for better things, and Resurget Generibus, it shall rise from the ashes. It represents the spirit of Detroiters to not be defeated by misfortunes. Besides the flag and the seal we have here, we have here a sculpture of a beaver. It had a very important role for early settlements as well as development of the city because of the fur trade. Fur trade had flourished during the reign of Louis XIV, or the Great. At that time, France was a center of fashion and trend in Europe. So aristocrats and high society people were all wearing furs. And those of the highest quality was considered those mammals of the cold temperature, like this beaver. Well, for a while, it was possible to acquire pelts inside the territory of Europe, but very quickly ran out and became scarce because of the high demand and overhunting. So Europeans look around for another resources, and they found a perfect place, the New World, or in this case, North America. So sometimes it is exaggerated that Detroit was founded to provide Louis XIV with beaver hunts. Here we have the bust of Monsieur de Cadillac. He was a French explorer, adventurer, and trader of furs and ivory. For some, he was a great hero, and for some others, especially Amerindians, a controversial personality because of his unfair form of trading. Actually, he was imprisoned a couple of times, the first one in Quebec and the other in Bastille, but quickly released because he has a powerful backup of political personalities. By the way, the Cadillac division of General Motors was named in honor of him. This is a map of the Great Lakes and the territory surrounding, just to explain a little bit about the earliest European explorers who used waterways to advance deeply inside the continent. French explorers used St. Lawrence River and went all the way down through the Great Lakes and rivers connecting them. On their path, they founded many settlements, as we can see here, and Detroit was one of them. And here it comes the origin of the name Detroit, or Détroit in French means strait, because Detroit River was a narrow layer of water between Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie. So, Détroit, strait. When French explorers arrived in the territory of current Michigan, they found three major tribes of Native Americans. They were Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Chippewa. They comprised a bigger group called the Three Fires, and it is said that Potawatomi was the tribe which had a closer relationship or most frequent trading with Europeans. Here we have the fellow Native American, which is not wearing his traditional outfit, because he is already an outcome or result of the intensive exchange process. So he is using a shirt, a musket, and a horn-made gunpowder folder. This is a small exhibit of Native Americans too, and I would like to focus to these in particular. They are copper fish hooks. Yes, they are made of metals. Metallurgy in America, particularly in Meso and South America, were quite developed. Then they employed metals like copper, gold, and silver using heat. But in North America, copper was the only metal used, and they didn't require any technique of smelting and extraction, because after the last glacier, it was left plenty of copper in the nature. This is a replica of what would have been the earliest fur trading post. We can appreciate here a wide variety of products, including woolen and cotton cloth, well, blankets, shirts, ribbon, tobacco, pipes, snack box, very valued metallic tools like knives, of course, muskets and gunpowders, and maybe the most dangerous product here, alcohol, including rum and brandy. To feed the earliest population, fur trading was not enough. It was necessary first, and especially in French settlements, it was very common the presence of a type of a farm called ribbon farms. They were founded far north around St. Lawrence River till the Detroit River. And in other parts of the world, like in South America, in Chile or Brazil, even in Japan, the northern island of Hokkaido. And about the dimension, around St. Lawrence River had a wide of 20 to 30 feet and 2 to 3 miles long. But coming near the River Detroit was as wide as 250 feet. So, as the name reveals, Ribbon Farm was a very narrow portion of land extending from the coast more so perpendicularly like series of ribbons. Even though the idea may look or may appear a bit weird, they were actually very practical and had a lot of advantages. For example, an easy access to waterways. And then, relating to farming techniques, plowing. Plowing was much easier because it required a lesser number of turns for oxen teams. And finally, they fostered communication and socialization since most of farmers raised their houses at the top end of their land or lot. So they were clustered in a relatively limited area. Before going to the next step in the history of Detroit, I would like to talk a little bit about the Great Fire and days just following the event. According to the legend, the fire started in around the house of a baker called John Harvey. He was one day smoking using his pipe, and after he finished, he discharged on the ground. It seems that it still contained a little bit of fire. It was quite a windy day, so the fire caught the heat of a burn and quickly spread to other wooden structures. Pretty much all the houses at that time. The entire population started a very big effort to extinguish the fire, forming lines and transporting bucket after bucket the water from the river and pouring into the fire. But all efforts were in vain because after a few hours, the village turned into ashes. But I would like to rescue a positive thing here because no one died in the fire. After the disaster was the time for reconstruction. It was assigned the territorial judge called Augustus Woodward, and he made a quite innovative street plan, placing some streets on a diagonal direction spreading from the center of the city. And it was a copy of a model already existed in Washington, D.C. and France. And that's the reason why the main street that divides the city in east and west side, it's called Woodward. Also, secondarily, since the President of the United States at that time was Thomas Jefferson, and it was who assigned Woodward for the territorial judge in Michigan. The street perpendicular to Woodward is called Jefferson. Going through the demography, at the beginning in 1701, the population was only 100. In 1805, during the Great Fire, 600. 1820, 1,500, and 30 years later, 1850, 21,000, 14 times in comparison to 1820. Why this sudden increase in the population? That was because of the opening of Erie Canal. Originally connecting two cities in New York State, Albany on Hudson River and Buffalo at Lake Erie. It was built to create a connection or a navigable route between New York City and the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes. It was influenced by previous very successful examples in Europe that created a phenomenon called the British Canal Mania, which at the same time influenced the United States. But there were some engineering as well as financial and workload challenges, mainly because there were land rise of more than 500 feet between Albany and Buffalo. It was required the presence of some devices called locks, which allowed to lower or to raise the boat between two different water levels. Well, since this project was pretty big, it was estimated a need of around 50 locks. According to the President Thomas Jefferson, this was a little short of madness. In current language, have you gone nuts? But the New York governor, the Will Clinton, not Bill Clinton, the Will Clinton, he had a gut feeling and was very, very sure that it was going to be a huge success. So he insisted, and finally got the approval. Even though his project was called Clinton's Ditch or Clinton's Folly. After the canal was opened and started function in 1825, it was a huge success indeed. Even it changed the track of the history of many cities. New York was now considered the biggest and most important port in the United States. And also, it lowered the cost of transportation between Detroit and New York, an amazing percentage of 95. Also, the trip was shortened from 4 weeks previously on land, almost 1 month, to less than a week, 5 days. So the first half of the 19th century was characterized by much easier transportation, increasing in the population, and referring to fur trade, they were declining and experiencing downfalls. First of all, because furs were out of style already, they were not trendy anymore. Secondly, as in Europe, beaver were scarce, was running out. And finally, thanks to the opening of Erie Canal, it was now possible to exploit much more profitable natural resources. As we can see here, lumber or timber, mainly pine, as well as some minerals like copper and iron. These natural resources, as well as transportation, was a very important foundation for industrialization. During the second half of the 19th century, just a few decades after the Industrial Revolution in Europe, Detroit was already known as a city of heavy industries. Not yet automobile, but stoves, ships, and railroad cars. And especially stoves, at the end of the 19th century, Detroit was proud to be the biggest producer in the world. So, most of the manufacturers were incorporated during the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the Reconstruction era. And that raised a very high demand for workers, attracting waves and waves of immigrants from Europe. And the presence of a lot of industrial workers laid the foundation of first labor unions. We are almost finishing the tour, but before, a pretty quick mention about the ship industry. Because Henry Ford started his career here. He worked as an apprentice machinist under the firm of Detroit Dry Dock, and it was a huge inspiration that led him to become later a magnate or a tycoon of automobile industry. And the rest is history.